So energy poverty, as the term describes, is not having enough energy to basically have any type of economic growth and impact in your life, or not having any energy at all. In a COVID time, these are people that just can't stay at home, because they have no means of survival, because there's no basic energy. The way the poverty comes in is you can give people energy, but you need to give them adequate energy for them to either live comfortably in their households, but also thrive in their businesses. So that's where the word sustainability comes in as well, when we talk about, sustainable development goals and Sustainable Development Goal 7 in particular, access to affordable and clean energy in a sustainable way. So there are about 3 billion people around the world that don't have enough energy to develop themselves, to have Zoom calls like this, to grow. And that's why it's really important that when we talk about energy access, it's about energy development and getting everybody out of energy poverty. And that's really a simplified version of exactly what it means. In terms of COVID, what COVID has done is, I think the last statistics I saw from the IFC has moved 150 million people back into extreme poverty. The more people you move back into extreme poverty, more likely are the people who don't have access to electricity anyway, or maybe had the minimum amount and don't have any at all. So it's made the situation worse. What COVID has also shown is just how fragile everything is. So let's take the African continent, with only 24-25% of all primary healthcare having any electricity at all. You can also see the problem with the vaccine distribution, right? Because the vaccines have to be stored, they have to be cooled. So we're trying to get everyone to think of energy as an entire ecosystem that has to take into consideration energy access, energy transition into cleaner energy, energy for cooling, and then obviously energy efficiency. And one of the ways we're trying to really, as my banner says, be bold in everything, is the high-level dialogue that we're having at the General Assembly this year. What this is, it's the first time in 40 years the UN has actually called a meeting on energy. And we're trying to explain to people just how important energy is to the climate conversation, but how important energy is to sustainable development with people as well. And we're really looking forward to coming up with innovation ideas to help us, because frankly, we're not on track, and we have to get back on track to make sure, we do achieve these goals and we get people out of energy poverty. Well, to put it simply, if we do not achieve Sustainable Development Goal 7, access to modern, affordable, sustainable, and clean energy by 2030, we cannot achieve net zero by 2050. It's actually scientifically and mathematically impossible. So that's the first thing. You can't achieve your planet goals if you don't also look at it from a people perspective. If you have, and the way the trajectory is going now, by 2030, if we continue at this pace of business as usual, we will have about 650 million people that still have no electricity, because populations don't stop growing because you have issues with energy poverty. So that's a really, really important point. When we think of our COP, our nationally determined contributions, everything, energy has to be a firm part of that. We also have, again, I'm gonna touch on the African continent and maybe a little bit on the Asian continent, where we have 1 billion people in Africa. So if you look at sub-Saharan Africa and you take away South Africa, who are responsible for about 0.55% of global emissions currently. You want their energy transition and for them to grow economically in a low carbon way. So you need to reinforce these messages from now. You have to say exactly what are these countries' energy transition plan, because they don't have enough energy to start off with. 1 billion people are responsible for 81 gigawatts. Put this in consideration, that's like what Germany produces every day. Do you see what I mean? So it's important for people to understand energy poor and energy rich countries, and the fact that people cannot get out of economic development scenarios well without energy. So what we're trying to emphasize is that energy that we're using has to be clean and has to be sustainable. To get there, a lot of financing is involved and a lot of data is also involved. And it has to be a global effort to understand the needs of very poor countries, developed island states, and also just have this view that we are going to also tackle this, because you don't want to be coming back in 10, 20 years time to transition their energy systems. Or again, you know, we've already learned from that. It is taking a few decades in the global north, but we have to say that, look, we have a baseline to almost start from scratch now in a lot of these countries. We know that it's the best way in terms of GDP to go for clean energy. We know it creates more jobs than the traditional fossil fuel equivalent. So we know all of these now, but we need the tools to make sure that these countries thrive and they become exemplars of what you can do with a really clear climate change objective as it reaches energy, instead of what is happening now, where they're kind of like the victim of climate change. I mean, there are different things happening. I mean, I do think that we're living in a world, this is 2021, it's absolutely unacceptable that 1.6 million women die every year from fumes from cutting down trees. And that means they need clean cook stoves and they need electricity, or they need cleaner solutions to make sure that they thrive. That needs to be our number one priority, because it doesn't only harm the environment, it's also killing women and children at an alarming rate. So there's different technologies. Some countries have gone for cleaner solutions like you know, LPG solutions. Other countries are looking at, you know, electricity for cooking, which again, it's getting momentum, but it's not necessarily there. And with more innovation, and again, I'm always going to harp on finance, it could get there. But we are in that point where this is probably the largest polluter in the energy sector. A lot of people think in the developing world it's industry or things like that. It's actually not. It's actually, you know, land use. It's a lot of cutting of trees, lots of burning of charcoal. That is what is one of the largest polluters there. And it's really important we focus on that, because it's obviously damaging in terms of gender. So back to my time in Nigeria, what was critical for me when you go into communities is just to understand how much energy they actually need and how much energy they need to thrive. A lot of women in communities, their homes are also their businesses. So it's not okay to just give them a solar lantern and say you've ticked a box, right? You need to know what they do. Do they need drying facilities for their yams or their cassavas? What do they need? It's shocking how entrepreneurial women are. So, and we've seen, especially in Nigeria and in Africa actually, that if you give a woman sustainable clean energy, she's more likely to earn 59% of what she was earning before. That is a huge leap. You know, what we want to do with the solutions and the aids and technology we're providing to people is to have them being sustainable in terms of they are self-efficient themselves. And you just don't have this continuous cycle of aid and aid and aid, because that won't work as well. So giving people adequate sustainable energy is also key. Well, I think it's a global effort, climate change. So it has to be a global effort. It has to be all countries coming together saying, we want to solve this issue. I think it's unfair, the split between the global north and the global south in terms of what typically happens. We need something in the regions of about 40 billion every year from now to 2030. Africa barely gets 4 billion, and I think Asia barely gets about 10 billion. So that should just show you the scale of the problem already in terms of how much money invested into the energy systems that are currently in these countries. So from your development finance initiatives, I'm trying not to use acronym, to, you know, to your multilateral development banks, you know, everybody has to rally together because it's a global problem. It's like COVID. You can't just sort out one area. You have to make sure everybody is benefiting. And that's one of the things we're saying, that if we're giving money to sustainable development and we're giving money to post-COVID recovery, where's the energy element in that? And how do we make it part and parcel? Because it is the quickest way to get more economic growth and GDP into the country. So, you know, even people say, I don't care about climate, it doesn't really matter. The economics works, right? And that's when we're talking to different governments, the language we say are slightly different, because a lot of governments care about jobs and GDP before you start a climate conversation. It doesn't matter how you say it, as long as you are making sure your points are for people and for planet. but we have to really, really look at it and make a concerted effort that these projects in these countries need funding. Well, I'm obviously excited because it's actually putting energy on a different platform that it hasn't been before. But what would be really nice and what we are striving for are these things called energy compacts. And unlike a lot of compacts and declarations that we had in the past, this is purely energy focused, with obviously aligned to net zero Paris, and aligned to countries' NDCs. I think it takes the NDCs to another level, which they've appreciated. So again, if somewhere like South Africa says they're getting out of coal, that's the statement that would be in the NDC. What we're asking for is how will you do it? And that's very important, the next level of exactly how you're going to do it. And please allow us to monitor you every single year. It's a very, very simple template. It's actually on the website. We made it all templatable. And even the kind of reporting has been made as simple as possible. But again, it's all about countries. It's not just about what you want to do in your own country. It's all about countries who also want to support other countries, right? So, the UK could decide to have a compact to say, I want to provide power for 10 million, Asians or people in South Asia. Again, how do you plan to do it? So it kind of goes both ways. It's not just about yourself. It's about how you also want to help others. It's a way to support the NDCs, a way to support Paris, but a way to also show tangible things happening on ground. And it's not always about, providing power to more people. It could be providing energy efficiency. It's for you to tell us how you are really getting out of coal, what you expect. So there's so many different ways around it. But we have to look at all ourselves and say, look, this has to be a global effort. And, my job is to make sure no one is left behind as we formulate all these things. Well, in my time in the Rural Electrification Agency, it was private sector that did the projects. So, private sector is key as an implementation partner. It's not, government shouldn't be doing everything, right? It's not sustainable. So the role of private sector is to come and execute some of these projects, either if you're doing large-scale renewables to go on your grid, or you're doing decentralized energy solutions, which is probably more popular now in Africa because of the terrain. It should be done by private sector. And what government should focus on is creating the enabling environments to allow private sector to thrive. So the policies, the regulations, subsidies if required, and then also just being able to attract the right type of private sector, because you have enough deep data for your country to be attractive. And it might sound very basic to you, but some countries might not be able to tell you where their unelectrified population is. Do you see what I mean? So that type of granular information in terms of, integrated energy plans is critical for you to see what is the least cost way to provide clean energy in your community or in your country. So that's also a really, really big part of what we try and do in sustainable energy for is to help government plan and the most, like I said, the least cost and the cleanest solutions, instead of what's been happening typically where you kind of go to one route of just large grid and large grid extensions. And sometimes that isn't cost effective. I think of it as a large opportunity. I mean, I ran the largest energy access facility in Africa, which was in Nigeria, which was a $550 million clean energy, decentralized energy. And, it was just fantastic where you went from, 5 developers on the continent, and now you have over 100, and most of them are actually African. So you also really need to look at it as developing, local capacity is also key, and lending yourself to the international capacity, when needed. But you have to create a market, basically. And it's very, very key for the private sector are not going to come in if there's no market, if there are no right policies for them to thrive. They're just not going to come in, and you can't really blame them. I think, again, energy subsidy is something that's generalized too much. It depends on the country, right? So in a country like mine, in Nigeria, the subsidy should be focused on decentralized energy solutions. And if you connect a customer using a solar hybrid solution or a standalone solar solution, then you get your subsidy, but you can only get it post-connection, right? To make sure that if you gave the subsidy, it's connected. And that should only be with work done with the private sector. And some other larger economies that they're trying to challenge channel technologies like green hydrogen and stuff, that's a completely different type of subsidy. Do you see what I mean? That's kind of a technology-based subsidy. So again, there's always these general, I think there's a place for subsidies. There has to be a place for subsidies, but how to use it the most efficient would determine on the geography, right? The country you're in, the policies and the terrain. You have to consider the political situation, and you have to consider the best way to do things. I don't think it's about the subsidy. I think it's about how the subsidy is developed and how the subsidy is provided. You know, I don't think it's about should we have subsidies or not. Because if we decide we're not having subsidies, there'll be a lot of millions, maybe 1 billion people that will really suffer that decision. You know, it's how you implement these subsidies and make sure that whatever you're implementing is aligned to Paris. And more importantly, it has an end date. Then what we found is like some of these subsidies, they just never end, you know, and you're looking and saying, okay, so when you're developing a subsidy, you have to know when you're going to exit the subsidy. And that is sometimes blurred and unclear. But that is why a lot of subsidies have failed as well. But it would be wrong of me to say subsidies are not needed. I think a just transition needs to be a period of time that people go from a dirty fuel to a clean fuel, right? Noting some very, very key facts, like the just transition again for Africa is going to be completely different from the just transition in the UK. For many issues, like I already said, there's not even enough energy in Africa, you know, and you're decarbonizing 0.55%. What are you actually decarbonizing? You know, it's an energy poor continent. So how would a just transition work for that? What will work for that is saying, this is your low carbon trajectory. I always use this analogy, and it's really important to note, you know, when everyone says stop fossil day one, I'll stop fossil now, what it actually means in terms of the average sub-Saharan country. And I'm going to take South Africa out of that discussion. So I always try to break it down like, okay, I'm in Lagos City in Nigeria, right? And I have an auntie who takes a bus to work every day, highly polluting bus. She takes her to work every day. It's like 3 hours. And she's been saving all her money to buy a little, you know, Kia Punto little car that runs on diesel or something, or petrol. And what we're basically telling African countries is, or what we're saying my auntie is, don't buy that. You have to buy a Tesla now. And we don't know how you're going to finance it, right? But you continue taking the bus until you do that. That is the problem, right? The problem is what is the clean energy offer on the other side? And that's what we really, really need to tackle. If we tackle that, we will realize that just transition or energy transition moves a lot faster and people are with us. But right now, people don't see the horizon of what they're going to do past oil and gas. You know what I mean? It's not just about the power sector, it's about their transportation sector. It's about how they earn their money. Do you know what I mean? A lot of countries are, you know, the revenues actually keep them afloat. What we should be telling them, or what we should be helping them on, is what are the alternatives? How are you going to truly move out of this sector? And it's not stop funding now. That's not the answer. And you figure it out somehow, right? It's taking us in the global north like 4 or 5 decades, but you're going to figure out in a couple of years. That's not going to happen. So for me, just transition is sitting down with government, understanding their issues, understanding their political issues, and helping them plan how they get to a path of net zero, and being able to actually articulate with data, with maths, with science, what is the last possible date they have to stop using every single fuel in their arsenal, and when can they transfer to renewables, and what type of backup systems, you know, affected. I'm very, very strong on this point, because it's the narrative of the global north just dictating what the global south has to do is a very, very dangerous narrative. And there is a pathway where we win for planet and for people. well, jobs is the conversation, right? So, you know, you can get 3.5 more jobs than the fossil equivalent, right? But you have to create the systems and the projects to develop these jobs. You have to make sure that if you are telling people that are maybe in a coal-dependent community, right, that the entire country is moving to renewables, you're training them from now. You know, you're not going to take 1 or 2 million people and get them redundant. You have to think about that. You have to think about the labor laws. You have to change all sorts of different issues have to be factored into your just transition conversation. But I mean, these countries aren't, you know, these countries, you know, it's not like they don't want to change. They've seen from COVID now, that's probably the fastest way to recover. What they're saying is, can you give me some help to get there? And I don't believe the global response has been good enough. And that's why we will always, you know, try to respond better. And we're challenging everybody to help these countries. So if you help them, you give them the clean energy packages, you have finance packages, and they decide they don't want to do it, then you can argue. But if you don't give them the tools and then complain, it's a little bit unfair, and it's a bit hypocritical as well. I don't think it's been a lost opportunity. I think, you know, I think the word fossil fuels has to be dissected a little bit. You know, I think, you know, if you're saying that you're transitioning to renewables and you're going from coal to gas to renewables, it's different from saying, you know, all fossil is bad. I think in terms of, I think a lot more could have gone into, you know, what we're trying to say in the financing discussion in terms of energy poverty. And I'm really hoping it will still happen because it needs to be energy for development. But as we move along, we are sharing the renewables are the cleanest way, but I don't think anyone should be dictating. I think what we should be doing is going into countries, showing the data that this is the best economic way to move forward, and giving them the clean energy offer. I think it's very hard for us to really talk about the just transition, which is really critically needed, if there's no offer on the table. And so I look at it a completely different way. I don't look at it a fossil or not fossil conversation. I'm like, what is the clean energy offer to get people to transform the way they think about their entire energy systems, you know, and not make declarations for the sake of it, but think about how it actually affects them, how they still get to their economic growth targets, how they make sure their people are healthy with the right energy systems, and then you can move forward. With that. So that's the way I look at it. And that's why I will always challenge a lot of these things and a lot of these platforms, because you can't just look at it with the lens from the developing world that basically has all the money, and there's some magic way that the developed world that has all the money, and then you look at it and say the developing world would just leapfrog. That doesn't make any sense. You know, there has to be a path. And for me, it has to be a low carbon path. I'm a bit biased, and because I train 600 amazing young women who are doing amazing things in renewable energy right now. I think women are just more efficient. I think they're trusted more in these certain roles because, you know, the beauty about renewable energy is there's so many different things you can do. So apart from like solar technicians and planners and engineers, you know, there's the you know, the payment collector, there's the IT integrator, and you know, so you're not just having like back in the day where you had to have, you know, like me, like a pure power systems engineering thing. You can come in with a STEM subject and just really thrive. So I really think the future is bright, but I also think that there's some policies you need to implement. So I said when I was in Nigeria running a program that if your gender balance wasn't at least 40% women, you cannot get access to this subsidy. People have to make it happen, and we need to train young women to make sure they're employed. It's not just saying, oh, it's going to happen for women. That's not how the world works. It might look good, it might be great in the report, but we also have to make sure that we are challenging the norms. And, you know, it's for the women to prove themselves, you know, when they get into those roles, but we have to create the opportunities. And I don't think enough countries understand the power they have by insisting that women have to be hired by a lot of these renewable energy companies. And it's the same thing, sorry, with race as well. I think, you've got a lot of companies operating in Africa, a lot of big boards, big corporations, and none of them have, a Black or an African representative, and it happens in Asia as well. I think there's certain things that we have to insist on. Well, that was amazing. We were working on building solar hybrid systems for universities. So these are quite a bit bigger decentralized systems, about 10 to 15 megawatts. And one of the things I decided to do was take between 20 and 40 girls in each of the universities and train them on renewable energies in their final year of university. So these are women in the STEM subjects. So what I did before we started training them was consulted with all the different renewable energy organizations and ask them what we should train them on, because training for training doesn't make any sense to me. It has to be training for employment, and, kind of made sure that all the topics they were trained on, this was quite intense, it was like a 6-month intense thing, was for them to be employed. They went through interview processes and stuff, and I'm really glad. I mean, a lot of them were hired, and about, probably about 10 or 12 of them just set up businesses on their own. Because, and I think there's like 2 who won an award for an invention the other day, which I was extremely proud of, but that's just dedicating 6 months, hardly any money, to some young ladies who are just fresh out of university. And it's the most impactful thing that I've done in my life. It's the most rewarding thing. Being able to give that opportunity to young women, because I was a young woman once, and if I didn't get the opportunities, I wouldn't be speaking to you right now. And I think sometimes when we get into these roles, we forget that. We forgot the importance of looking back and bringing people along with you, so they have a voice, they have a seat at the table, and they also just have a better life moving forward. I mean, what drives me to energy access? Again, I'll give you another story. When I was much younger, in my 20s, I got an opportunity to provide power to a baby hospital. And when you see things, but it doesn't really grab you. Like when you think about energy access or not having energy access, you think of it as an inconvenience. I never kind of grasped there was the difference with the baby living or dying, right? So I remember walking into this baby hospital, and all these women were clapping for me. We had finished the project, and the doctor came to me and said, it only takes 7 seconds during a major operation for a woman or baby or both to die. And that 7 seconds just stopped to me. It just said that there's no generating set you can turn on in 7 seconds. You know what I mean? Like, so when we talk about sustainable energy, for me, I feel like it's the difference between a baby or a mother living or dying, so it's so important. That's why, when we're at these big forums and talk about these things, I always like to bring it down to the grassroots level, right? Because the decisions we make always affect the most vulnerable people, right? It doesn't affect you and me, unfortunately. It affects the most vulnerable people on ground that don't have these many tools. So that's what keeps me going, just because of the important role women had in my life and the important role my daughters have in my life. And if there's any job you can have where you save somebody's life, I think that's the best thing you could do. Every time it takes longer to make a decision, or every time we procrastinate on finding the perfect solution, which does not exist, people are suffering and people are dying. And I don't want to end on a morbid tone, but that is the reality, on the ground level. So we need to kind of just start working harder and faster. And I'm dedicated, my whole team's dedicated, and so many people are dedicated. And when we think about climate, if we could please think about energy as part of that, because it's such an important part of us achieving net zero by 2050. We have the solutions to make sure everyone gets adequate power and they get it in a clean way. We just need to implement it now.